Hi everyone, I'm Jess Ward and I'm with you today to talk about understanding the functions of behaviour in the early years. I'm a psychologist with the Education Department and I've been with the department for almost 5 years now. I'm currently working at the Flinders Park Education Office. So I'd like to start with an acknowledgement of country today. The poem I'm going to read is by Jonah Hill. Today we stand in the footsteps millennia old. May we acknowledge the traditional owners whose cultures and customs have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. Since men and women awoke from the great dream, we honour the presence of these ancestors who reside in the imaginations of this land and whose irrepressible spirituality flows through all creation. So the key ideas we're going to be speaking about today are the functions of behaviour, the ABC of behaviour, and we'll go into that in a bit more detail, the positive behaviour support key principles, strategies for increasing positive behaviours in your setting, and how to manage or support persistent and challenging behaviours. Before we get started, I just want to make a note about children with additional needs. When we're talking about children who present with challenging behaviours, we must consider that there may be a number of factors contributing to this presentation. The list here is by no means exhaustive. However, it does give you a bit of an idea about the many possible contributing factors to behavioural presentations. It's important that we consider developmental exceptionality, sensory processing difficulties, any speech and language impairments, and of course, considerations around attachment difficulties or any experiences of trauma. A child's difficulties could be in one of these areas, or they may be across a number of these areas. Now we're going to move into looking at the functions of behaviour. It's important to remember that behaviour is communication and it doesn't occur in isolation. Challenging behaviours often develop in the context of a student's environment and previous experiences. Any challenging behaviours we might encounter have been beneficial to the child at some point in time. At some point, those behaviours may have gotten a need met, protected the child, or made them feel good. I want you to think, for example, about a child who might be throwing rocks at a tree, just for fun. Teacher comes up to them, has a conversation with them about how dangerous throwing rocks can be. They might share a story together about how safe behaviours are important, or they might redirect the child to another activity, and they might participate in that activity with them. The next day, that child might start throwing rocks again. The teacher observes that as he's throwing rocks, he'll look around to see if any of the teachers have noticed him. What the teacher might not know is that the child in this scenario has a baby sibling at home. Since the arrival of the baby, the child has gotten less one-to-one time with his parents. When the teacher offers one-to-one support to teach the child about safe behaviours, they have actually inadvertently reinforced the problem behaviours. The child has made a connection between throwing rocks and one-to-one time and has used this strategy again to get their needs met. So when we're tackling behaviour, our first task is to build up a holistic picture of the child, considering all of their life domains. Who is the student and what are their needs? How did the student come to behave in this way at this time? We must observe the child performing the behaviour within its context to determine the meaning behind the behaviour. In young children, there are 4 key identified functions of behaviour: social attention, escape, gaining something tangible, or self-regulation. Almost all of their behaviours will fit into one of these 4 categories. If we can identify the functions of the behaviour, it makes it much easier to reduce or replace these behaviours. As I mentioned, we must observe behaviour in its context to understand its function. When we are observing behaviours, it can be helpful to identify what happened before the behaviour occurred, the behaviour itself, and what happened after the behaviour. ABC charts can be really useful tools for determining the functions of behaviour as they break down the behaviour into an antecedent, the behaviour itself, and the follow-up or consequence of the behaviour. When we think about an antecedent, we need to be able to identify what the trigger was that led to the behaviour we're seeing. Without this information, challenging behaviour can appear to come out of the blue. But behaviour rarely occurs in isolation, and identifying triggers can help with the overall behavioural support. Once a trigger is understood, work can then occur to remove or reduce the trigger, or alternatively to begin to desensitise the child to the trigger if it's not feasible to avoid it. When we think about behaviour, we must be specific in describing the behaviours we're seeing. For example, it is not enough to say that a student was hitting others. Were they hitting adults or children? Was it only if you got really close to them, or were they going out of their way to hit others? Was it a slap? Was it a punch? Where did it happen? Was it inside or outside? What time of the day was it? And what activity was it during? Then we think about the consequences. What happened immediately afterwards? Was the child reprimanded? Did others laugh, cry, or retaliate at the behaviour? Was there anything maintaining the behaviour? Did the child gain anything from the consequence? For example, one-to-one adult time, or escape from an unwanted situation? This table demonstrates how the same behaviour with different antecedents and different consequences could serve a variety of functions for a child. It highlights the importance of gathering additional and detailed information to better understand why the behaviour is occurring. As you can see in each scenario here, the behaviour is the same. Child throws an item. However, if you quickly look over the antecedents, consequences and functions, you can see that that one behaviour can actually serve a lot of different functions and can look very different in different scenarios. So today we're also going to focus on the broad strategies that can be used across the whole kindergarten or primary years to support reduction of unwanted behaviours. This slide outlines the key principles to consider when planning a behavioural intervention. So, when we're carefully assessing what is causing the underlying problem, we want to have a clear understanding of why the behaviours are occurring, as this will allow for more targeted intervention approaches. We need to be clear and specifically define the problem behaviours. Use of the ABC charts to monitor these behaviours will help further define the problem. We need to be consistent with strategies. So all staff who interact with the student need to be on the same page about what the adult response to the behaviour is. The response also needs to be present in all or almost all of the instances where the behaviour occurs. We don't want to overload the child or the adults, so focusing on 1 to 2 strategies or behaviours at a time is best. If you try to reduce or replace all difficult behaviours at once, you will end up overwhelmed and so will the child. Give a strategy time to work. So studies have shown that between 7 and 8 hours of a rigorous one-to-one support are required to have a significant behavioural impact. That's not to say that that's what you must do. Rather, it illustrates that strategies take time to work, especially in an environment where behavioural change is not the only goal. Know that there will be setbacks, and it's possible that the child's behaviour may get worse before it gets better, but persistence is key. We need to model and teach appropriate responses. Children learn much of their behavioural cues from watching others. When we are around children, our verbal and non-verbal communication is on display for all to see. We must ensure that we are acting as good role models, demonstrating the types of behaviours and language that we want to see. We need to ensure reinforcers are tied to appropriate behaviours. So when we're looking to provide a reinforcer, where possible, it should be connected to the behaviours we want to see. And finally, we want to stop inappropriate behaviours using simple language and verbalise simple consequences. When people are heightened, they can find it challenging to think rationally and thoroughly. When a child is heightened, lengthy and wordy conversations with them about why what they did was wrong will not be helpful. They will not de-escalate the situation and they won't reduce the chances of it happening again. When a child is heightened, they need short, direct, and firm instructions presented without strong emotion from adults. When entering into new behavioural strategies, here are a few things I want you guys to remember. What worked today might not work tomorrow. Once we've reduced adult input or scaffolds, it is okay to reinstate them again if they're needed. That doesn't mean it's a failure, it's just another opportunity to grow and learn. Behavioural support can and should be fluid. It's always good to have and use a variety of different tools, and practice makes permanent. Research tells us that repetition strengthens neural pathways, so it's definitely important to keep practicing. And finally, the behaviour may get worse before it gets better, so the only advice I can give you is hang in there. Next, we're going to talk about some different strategies for supporting behaviour. We're going to talk about 6 main strategies: ensuring compliance, strategic ignoring, logical consequences, time away, teaching empathy, and release. Strategic ignoring sounds like an easy strategy to enact, but it can be one of the most challenging to do. It can feel very unnatural and very deliberate. However, by giving attention to a particular behaviour, we may be inadvertently reinforcing it. If we are occasionally, infrequently, or intermittently giving in to a child's behaviour, we are still providing them with enough reinforcement that they will continue to behave in this way. However, when a behaviour problem that is motivated by attention is ignored consistently and completely, it is one of the most effective strategies. The types of behaviours that we want to be focusing on for strategic ignoring are behaviours that are irritating, safe, and attention-seeking. So something like crying, whining, whinging, those types of things. These behaviours may get worse for approximately 3 to 4 days or sessions, but will usually decline after this. So these are some guidelines for strategic ignoring. Firstly, do not look at the child. Eye contact is very powerful as a reinforcer. If this is too difficult, then it's best to walk away and put some physical distance between you and the child, or stand up and turn your back on them. The child may follow you around, so you may need to think quite strategically about this. It's vital, though, that you appear to be taking no notice. Do not say anything verbally. Do not even tell the child to stop. Do not tell them you're ignoring them. And do not respond to any of the child's verbalizations. Next, do not say anything non-verbally. In order for ignoring to work, your body language must give the child the message that you are in control. A person who's walking quickly from one room to another, wringing their hands and talking non-stop, does not look in control. Maintain a neutral facial expression. Do not smile or frown. Your body language must give the message that you are in control. Do not give any physical contact. Do not pick up the child or cuddle them. If the child tries to climb on your lap and is still performing the behaviour, stand up to prevent this. Next, you want to start ignoring as soon as the undesirable behaviour begins and ignore immediately. And you want to not stop ignoring them until the undesirable behaviour has stopped. Ignoring the behaviour every time it occurs. Consistency is crucial. Remember that intermittently attending to the behaviour will increase its lifespan. You want to make sure that the undesirable behaviour is being ignored by everyone. While you're ignoring the behaviour, make sure it's not being reinforced by others, such as other workers, parents, grandparents, visitors, and so on. Sometimes the hardest part of ignoring is convincing other people to do it as well. Your ignoring won't have an effect unless other people are also ignoring the behaviour. Ignoring requires a team effort and a united front. We also want to model ignoring for other children so they respond in the same way. I just want to highlight that ignoring is really hard work. It's vital that you appear to take no notice and be in control. If it's driving you crazy though, try to remove yourself from the situation, walk into another room or go outside. You want to switch your attention to a child who is behaving appropriately. Give attention to a child who's behaving appropriately using all the skills learned previously and completely ignore the child who's misbehaving. This will set a good example for both children. If you're misbehaving, you are ignored. If you behave well, you get rewarded with attention. In this way, you are hitting two birds with one stone. You'll be increasing one child's appropriate behaviour and demonstrate a model for how to get the attention, and you will also be decreasing the inappropriate behaviour of the other child by ignoring it. And lastly, this can be tricky, but we do need to inform parents. Staff are often anxious that parents will misinterpret ignoring as the staff's inability to deal with or accept the behaviour. However, it's important that strategic ignoring has a place in behaviour management policies and that it is shared and discussed with parents for consistency. Now we'll move on to ensuring compliance. The way we make requests is important in ensuring compliance. We need to be clear in our own minds about how negotiable the request is before we make it. If there is a choice, then give it. Choices can be open, such as, what would you like to do? Do you want to pack up the toys? The child can answer no in this case. They could be restricted or a forced choice, such as, you can pack up the toys or help set the table for dinner. This means that you do not accept a no. If they say no, you restate the child's choices. Next is a process choice, such as you can walk inside by yourself or I can help you. If the child cannot choose, make the choice for them and ask them if they would like to do it by themselves or with your help. If a child does not have a choice, then don't invite a no response by asking a question. Instead, use a statement rather than a question, such as, I need you to pack up the blocks now so we can get ready for snack time. Pack up the blocks now, please. Including now puts a time frame on the request. And the so we can gives an explanation of what will happen next. Such requests are likely to increase compliance as they are short, direct, specific, and provide information about the next activity. Now we'll look at the guidelines for ensuring compliance. So you do need to get close to the child, wait for a natural break in events, and establish eye contact with them. This approach can be used to ensure compliance with all requests. It's a useful strategy for general use with all children. If a child repeatedly refuses to comply with requests or follow directions or instructions that are very important or non-negotiable, it may be time to consider an alternative strategy, which we'll discuss later. Now we'll talk about logical consequences. Logical consequences refers to the social order of events. They permit a child to learn from the reality of social order. We intervene to ensure they occur. Such as, if you write on the table, you'll have to clean the table. Or, if you make a mess, you will need to clean it up. Or, if you don't get dressed, you won't be able to go to the park. For the consequences to be effective, the child must see them as logically related to their behaviour. In other words, the consequences must fit the behaviour in a logical way. It's important to keep in mind that even the most logical of consequences can become punishment if we inject anger, warning, threats, reminders, or too much talk of any kind. Hostile body language, gestures, and facial expressions that negate our friendly words can also defeat the effects of logical consequences. So can hidden motives of power or revenge, the "this will teach them a thing or two" type attitude. Logical consequences require that we're verbally brief and to the point, that we follow through, and that we maintain a friendly, encouraging manner. They require our willingness to let children experience from the consequences of their behaviour. They involve mutual respect, such as, I know you're excited about listening to the story, but the noise is bothering the rest of us. Please sit quietly or you will need to separate until you're able to listen without disturbing others. They do not use moral judgment, so they separate the deed from the doer. An example might be, as you are not ready to follow the rules of water play, it looks like you are not ready to play in this area. And they only focus on present behaviour, such as, you can help with the cooking as long as you'll also help with the cleanup, as opposed to focusing on past behaviour, you didn't clean up last time, so you can't help this time. So our guidelines for logical consequences are as follows. We want to gain the child's attention immediately. We want to state the nature of the inappropriate behaviour in a calm manner. We want to determine the consequences. This should be contingent to the behaviour. We want to tell them why we're doing what we're doing and how long the activity will be withdrawn for. This must be fair and reasonable in the amount of time you deny the child access to the activity or toy. Younger children should have items removed for a shorter period of time. For example, since you can't play together without fighting, I will put all these games away for 10 minutes until we are ready to play without grabbing. We have to stick to the conditions of the consequences and allow the child access to the activity when the time has elapsed. And we want to ignore the child's complaints following the removal of the activity. However, if disruptive behaviour occur that is not dangerous, then we will ignore them. If disruptive behaviours occur that are dangerous, then we want to follow them up with the use of a different strategy. And finally, we need to carry out the procedure consistently, immediately, and contingently. Time away. So this is time away from positive reinforcement or positive attention. It enables children to regain control in a safe place and to calm down. It's not the same as punishment, and it's used when we see kids engaging in dangerous behaviour, extreme disruptive behaviour, or repeated non-compliance when other strategies have not worked. It should always be used as a part of a comprehensive strategy for teaching and not in isolation. And here are some guidelines for time away. Time away should be practiced before you implement it. Ideally, time away would be practiced with all children at group time, so one child is not singled out. This will also serve to remind all children of the rules of the centre. In some situations, it may be done with an individual child, such as if they need to be reminded of the rules after the group demonstration. And you can do this by explaining what will happen when certain behaviours occur, then taking them through the steps and rules. Behaviours that lead to time away must be clearly specified in advance. For example, if the child does any or all of the following: screams, yells, kicks, hits, or punches others, they should spend some time in time away. Tell the child the rules for time away. So they need to remain in time away for a specified amount of time. If the child cannot remain quiet for 1 minute, perhaps reduce the time period to what is achievable for that child. Might be 30 seconds, might be 20 seconds. Gradually over time, we want to increase the time once they're able to remain quiet for the shorter period. The time will also be shorter for younger children, no more than 1 to 2 minutes. And when we're placing the child in time away, it should be done unemotionally and with no attention. The child is told, go to time away, and is then led with no other comment or eye contact. Verbal and physical prompts are later gradually withdrawn as the child learns that time away is a place to go when they behave inappropriately. A timer that rings or beeps can also be helpful for identifying the amount of time for time away. The last strategy for supporting behaviour we're going to talk about today is release. Now, release is a strategy often required to respond to the more explosive, challenging and complex externalising behaviours. As I've noted here, release is defined as allow or enable to escape from confinement. And below I've got some guidelines to how we allow release. Firstly, we want to remove the audience. It can be really good when you've got a large group of children to practice emergency or safety drills with children. This can be a good way to get them to use a quick invacuation or evacuation to move away from a child requiring release when needed. We want to provide support at a safe and respectful distance. We want to assure that while the child is engaging in this behaviour, they are not in a position to hurt themselves or others. So you as the adult must remove harmful objects and stand far enough away that they feel they have space, but where you're still able to supervise. We want to reassure through verbal acknowledgement. We want to say something like, I can see that you're really angry because you're kicking the couch and yelling. I'll be here when you have calmed down. Once the behaviour has reduced, they will likely feel very tired and drained. Redirect them to an activity or space that helps them to regulate. Once the behaviour is over and the child has co-regulated, encourage them to re-engage in learning or play activities. It's important that we re-invite them back into the group so that they don't feel ostracised. It's important with release that we do not try to make them conform when they are in this state. We need to allow them to work through the emotional and physical responses to their dysregulation and find a way back to regulation through supportive and timely co-regulation. The last strategy we're going to talk about today is teaching empathy, which is much more of a proactive than a reactive strategy. When we talk about empathy, we're talking about awareness of another person's emotions and behaviours. Some of the key strategies include labelling feelings. So when an adult helps a child name what they feel, children can more easily make sense of their emotional world. We might say something like, "You're feeling frustrated right now because this didn't turn out the way you wanted. It surprised you to learn that Grandma was coming for a visit." Or, "You were happy when you got chosen for a turn of the game." Or maybe, "You're feeling angry because Sarah took your favourite toy." We also want to highlight similarities between the child and others. This might include pointing out that others may feel the same way in the same situation. "Remember how sad you felt when Robbie took your toy? That's how Gemma's feeling now." We want to give them positive trait attribution. The goal here is not simply to get the child to produce a given behaviour, but to help that child see himself or herself as the kind of person who is responsible and caring. We might say something like, "I'll bet you shared with Susie because you're a nice person who likes to make other children happy." We would also want to praise and model empathic behaviour. When the child performs an act of kindness, we tell them specifically which behaviour was right. "It was very kind of you to talk to the girl who was all alone on the swing. She must have been very lonely." One of the most powerful ways to teach children empathy is to be empathic yourself. The children will learn from you. We also want to teach children non-verbal cues. So we might play a game of guessing what other people are feeling and explain the specific reasons for your own guesses. "See that man? He's walking really quickly and his shoulders are all hunched and his eyebrows are scrunched together. I think he's angry about something." We also want to teach children the rules of politeness. Good manners are a concrete way for the child to show caring and respect for others. Please and thank you are phrases that children can and should be expected to use automatically. We can explain to the child that you're more inclined to hand over their sandwich when they ask for it politely, and that you don't like it when they order you around. Research suggests that children who learn responsibility also learn altruism and caring. Children can take over simple jobs such as feeding animals or helping pack things away. And each day is full of opportunities to remind the child to think about how someone else might feel. For example, if the child asks for a treat, you could say, "Sure. Now do you think your little sister would like a treat too?" Now for some children, some challenging behaviours are so ingrained, so effective and so pervasive that they require a more targeted approach. The most challenging behaviours have been, or possibly continue to be, effective in meeting the child's needs in one way or another. This may look maladaptive to you, but to the child this strategy has served a very useful function. For example, lashing out at others facilitates alone time. Throwing things distracts from the child who doesn't understand the learning task. Screaming when the iPad is taken away gets the iPad quickly returned to the child. In some instances, a more targeted and strategic approach is required to reduce challenging behaviours, and this may be when you might want to connect with your support services team. I've included for you today some information about positive behaviour support planning. While this is something that you might need support with from your support services team, I think it's important for everyone to understand some of the basic concepts. This is an overview of the elements of positive behaviour support planning. When we look at understanding, we want to look at the student and their behaviour. That's something we've spent a lot of time talking about today, and I feel pretty confident with all of you knowing a bit about. Then we move on to supporting and developing. These are when we look at using those behavioural strategies that we've discussed to support the child to modify their behaviours. And then finally, we've got responding, which is what we want to look at when we're looking at those more challenging behaviours. In the moment, what's our plan for responding and supporting that child? A competing pathways plan is a tool that can be used to help to monitor and change children's behaviour. If we look through the middle of the diagram, we can see that they gather information around setting events, and then triggers, challenging behaviours, and maintaining consequences. Now you'll see that those are very similar to our ABCs we talked about earlier. At the top of the diagram, you can see that we've got two boxes labelled desired behaviours and maintaining consequences. The desired behaviour is where we want the child to end up. That is our long-term goal. The maintaining consequence are the tools that we use to support the child to be able to maintain that new behaviour. However, kids don't get there overnight. So, in the meantime, when we're dealing with challenging behaviours, we need to jump down to the bottom of the diagram and look at the acceptable alternatives. An acceptable alternative is a behaviour that is less bad than the challenging behaviour, but not quite where we want them to be with the desired behaviour. Over time, these acceptable alternatives become closer and closer approximations to the desired behaviour. This table provides some examples of the difference between what might be a challenging behaviour versus an acceptable behaviour versus a desired behaviour. So if we take the first one, our challenging behaviour is punching and kicking. A more acceptable alternative to that might be swearing and insults. It's not quite where we want them to be, but they're not punching and kicking anyone. The more desired behaviour that we want is them talking or sharing or walking away when they have those feelings. When setting up a behaviour plan with acceptable alternatives, obviously we would have a lot more steps than this. It could include punching and kicking a bag instead of a person. It could include walking away before talking and sharing as a desired behaviour. This is just an example to show you how it might look. I've included here a list of different resources for you to use when you are coming up against a child that might be quite tricky. So we've got the contact details for the learning difficulties contact at Siru, Rachel, and some of the other resources are the Karma Classes document, the You Can Do It rubric, the ABLES website, and the link to Boxel profiles. If you don't have access to any of these things or you're not sure, you can also contact me. My details will be at the end of the presentation. I like to finish with this quote. If a child doesn't know how to read, we teach. If a child doesn't know how to swim, we teach. If a child doesn't know how to multiply, we teach. If a child doesn't know how to drive, we teach. If a child doesn't know how to behave, we teach or punish. So that's everything from me today. I just want to say thanks for listening. If anyone does have any questions, would like any additional information or links to resources, please feel free to get in touch. Probably sending me an email is the best way. Thanks again and have a great day.